Our speaker tonight is Bob Doglan, a Chicago-based filmmaker who made the film we're about to view, Monty and Rose. For those of you who do not know, Monty and Rose are two piping plovers who decided to nest on Montrose Beach, one of Chicago's busiest Lake Michigan beaches. Bob is a filmmaker, nature lover, and founder of Turnstone Strategies. And Bob, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you very much for joining us, Bob. Finally could get you out here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share this story. Uh, really, from where these two birds were hatched, the state of Michigan. The Monty and Rose came from Michigan in starting in 2017 when they were hatched on the western side of the state. I'm not going to talk a lot before the film. Hopefully it speaks for itself. I do have a few slides afterwards that I'd like to share to kind of add a bit to the story. The film's just 23 minutes long, so it's not an epic by any means, and hopefully it moves along quickly and you enjoy it. I came to the story first as a volunteer out on my local neighborhood beach in Chicago, and I think it's safe to say that it was just astonishing that a pair of piping plovers wanted to nest in the city. We could not have anticipated that before 2019 when this story starts, almost 2 years ago. So I'm going to flip over to sharing my screen and get onto my video. Nope, let's see here. Let me try that again. There it is. And so, yeah, introducing Monty and Rose. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll come right back at the end with a presentation, and then I'm glad to answer any questions you may have about the story. And just let me know if you can't hear it or see it for some reason.
Bob, it sounds like we don't have any audio.
It's quiet at first, so it might seem that way, but we'll see here in a second.
When people first saw the plovers starting to make little scratches in the sands, and then people said, well, maybe they will nest here. And we said, yes.
I remember when I first read the news, I honestly couldn't believe it at first.
These birds obviously saw something in this patch of beach that was suitable for their nesting habitat, and so that's where they decided to stake their claim.
Well, it was like, oh my goodness, will they survive? Will they be able to fledge on such a highly used and active beach?
I didn't know how to react, whether it was excitement as well. I knew the reality of it and the challenges to just recognizing the juxtaposition of this beach. I wasn't sure whether it was a naivete that I appreciated, that sure, we'll see how this goes.
For them to pick a spot where it wasn't going to conflict with humans was basically impossible.
So the first thing that went through my mind is we have to protect these nests. And remember, at the time, there was no enclosure. It was just, open to anyone to walk around. That first location that the plovers chose was, from a people standpoint, a crazy location.
Monty had actually done his goose stepping and was approaching Rose. And so we knew that that mating was going to be very, very shortly.
I was very concerned with the, just how busy this beach is. And when I learned that they had nested in an area prone to flooding, I was very worried.
On June 12th, I came. Rose was on the nest. The 4 eggs had been laid, and everything looked so peaceful. It looked like we were going to have a successful nesting experience. As we started looking at the forecast for the rest of the day, it was high winds, torrential rains, but even more concerning, a strong storm surge from the lake. There was already a lot of water on the beach, and there was a good chance that the water would rise to cover the nest.
So it's been raining on and off for a couple of hours now, and we're worried about the water coming closer to Monty and Rose's nest. One of the fears is that they'll abandon the nest if it goes underwater, and it's likely to rain even more this afternoon, so we're really not sure what will happen.
I looked and saw the waves building on Lake Michigan. We knew we were in trouble. And they were calling for 35 to 40 mile an hour north winds.
And it's a really sad day. You can see the water is done all the way up the beach. It's flooded the nest site of Monty and Rose.
It was very distressing to me. The 4 eggs were removed around 6 p.m. that day. By the next morning, the nest was under a foot of water, so it was definitely the right decision to make.
So unfortunately, that first nest had to be salvaged because the lake levels did rise that night and washed out.
In the initial day or so after the eggs were removed, I didn't actually think that there would be another nest. But then right afterwards, Monty started scraping nests again. Some of them were close to where the initial nest was. The other ones were much higher on that area of the beach, but closer to the boardwalk. And you could see that Rose didn't want to go back to that initial nest because it had flooded.
There was still hope that they would try again. Just knowing what the topography of the beach and the flooding issues on the beach, just wasn't sure where that was going to happen again.
And then one day we realized that they were interested in the volleyball court area, which is an area that makes so much sense from a nesting standpoint because it's high and dry. In all the storms that we had, that area wasn't underwater. So when they actually scraped their final and second nest inside the roped off area where the bank swallows nest, it looked extremely promising.
Way back about 14 years ago, we created some interpretive signs for Montrose Beach Dunes. And this sign right here behind me is our welcome sign up by the sidewalk. And in preparing that sign, the most iconic bird we could think of to put on it was a piping plover. So we've got a picture here. And, never in a million years did I dream that these birds would actually show up and nest right practically next to the sign. But in fact, that's what they did.
Today to move a planned music festival on Montrose Beach to another location. Conservationists say the concert could upset the habitat of an endangered bird.
So we got a request through the Park District from the promoter of the festival to have a meeting to discuss what they could do or how they could assure that the beach would be appropriately used to do if they were to have the Manby Festival here. And we did meet with them and we got some answers, but we weren't satisfied that the plovers could be appropriately protected.
I'd say I'm actually kind of disappointed in that the narrative even became that, the concert versus the birds, because this is something that we've been hearing for decades. And before I was born, this sort of, friendly neighborhood business person versus nature. And, this is 2019. We should be well beyond that narrative. There was no reason that, we couldn't have had both in some capacity.
I don't know why the Park District You know, and then I look at them as the real villains in this. They're the real enemy in this. Why they were not absolutely adamant about enforcing the protections inherent in the word sanctuary. I got really angry. And I went on social media and I, held up a picture that said, "Move the Mamby at the Beach Festival."
Every nesting pair in the population is critical in order to maintain the viability of this population. So the Endangered Species Protection Act that was established in 1973, and with that law comes a lot of federal guidelines and protection. But we recognized right from the beginning that we didn't want to come in and say, yeah, the feds are going to come in, the state's going to come in. The first thing we try to do is work with the park district, work with the local organizations, work with the local volunteers. What can we do to cooperatively work to try to get this plover pair to be successful?
There he is.
Where's that nest photocultivation? What's the we're built incubate them so that would increase the chances.
It's so exciting. Can you see them?
People were really rooting for these plovers to succeed. They wanted to make it. So we started seeing a lot of volunteers email and sign up.
And at that point, we really didn't know what the response would be or how many volunteers we would need. We just knew that we wanted to try to cover as much of the daylight hours as possible.
People were always stopping by. Most of them were really excited this was happening here. So I think it speaks well for the efforts of the Park District to create natural areas and to maintain them in a way that makes people understand nature a little better.
And then there was a call out for a need for volunteers. And it just really piqued my interest. I didn't know what to expect at first because I'm not a birder per se. So I was a little intimidated by some of the knowledge that some of the other volunteers had about birds. The reactions were just pure joy. I'm really excited to see the birds nesting there.
We wanted to make sure that some of the volunteers could focus on the people, educate them about the plovers, show them the plovers in their binoculars or their scopes. I think these birds have been a tremendous ambassadors to birding, to birds, to having wildlife within your city. It's a great story of engaging people and bringing them on board. They laid the first egg and then they laid the second egg. And this time, because it was a second clutch, IDNR and Fish and Wildlife Service decided to put the exclosure after the second egg. Usually they like to wait to the third or fourth egg. Incubation started on June 24th.
And that first night, the incubating bird would come off the nest all throughout the night, but we couldn't tell what she was coming off, where the bird was coming off the nest for. So we actually established a secondary camera that was just a little bit further back so that we could get a broader view of the nesting area. And that second camera was quite revealing that all night long there were skunks passing by the nest, there were raccoons passing by the nest. On one occasion there was a stray dog that went running by the nest. And you could just tell that the amount of activity at that nest site certainly would have been a nesting failure if that cage had been in place.
make sure that they survive this environment.
I think I was amazed at how quickly they were just out and about.
After they hatched and they started moving around, that probably was the most stressful time because basically they're these cute little fluff balls running around, but that's all they can do, run around. They can't fly, you know, their parents can only do so much to defend them.
Dogs off leash, even though they're not supposed to be, are always a problem here. Obviously, even just like the ATVs and things, the beach combers that are out here every day. So there's just a lot of things, a lot of noise.
What we're worried about is not necessarily as much the chicks being afraid of people, but stopping to feed. The entire goal of those first few weeks on the beach is for the chicks to feed, gain body fat, gain strength, so that they can fly away.
With, 100 and whatever people it was protecting them, I was still concerned for the survival of the chicks.
The number of predators, the number of threats just increased many times over as soon as those birds left that cage. Nearby, we had the gulls that could very quickly come down, swoop down and grab a chick and fly off with it. Crows that could be passing by, great blue herons, black-crowned night herons. Once they hatch, they leave the nest, and so they wouldn't retreat back to the safety of that cage. There are known mink in the area, there's foxes in the area, coyotes in the area.
As I was breaking down that one day, putting my scope away, I noticed there was a shape in the flooded area where the plovers had been hanging out, or I last saw them before the sun went down, that wasn't there before. And sure enough, it was a black-crowned night heron that had somehow snuck his way into the flooded area without anybody noticing, myself included. And, I've been birding long enough to know that black-crowned night herons are incredibly awesome birds and also incredibly merciless. And I have seen what they can do to their prey. So I had to rush out there with a flashlight and flash around and try to get it to fly out of that space.
One thing that was absolutely amazing was the two plovers' ability to take care of themselves and their chicks. They were seen and photographed chasing gulls, chasing mallards. The two of them ganged up on a great blue heron and chased great blue heron. One day, 12 killdeers came into the enclosed area and the chicks were still here. And Monty went after every single killdeer one at a time. We thought we would have to intervene because 12, we thought, oh, that's a huge number of killdeers for one plover to take on. He actually kind of like had a line and would go in a line and move one killdeer after the other closer to the outside of the enclosure until finally they were all outside of the enclosure. It was just masterful. Rose was as ferocious as Monty when she needed to be. I have pictures of her going after gulls. Boy, it was like karate moves. I mean, those gulls had no chance. They had to leave. On July 28th, I came to Montrose and I asked people whether all three chicks were present, and they weren't totally affirmative about it. And I start looking around and, I'm not seeing three chicks. I only see two. So I continue to observe. Eventually, Monty and the two chicks go to the body of water that's within the enclosure and go feeding there. But that one chick is standing, totally motionless. The chick standing up and with eyes closed wasn't just normal behavior.
Louise gave her authorization to collect the bird and immediately take it to the Lincoln Park Zoo, where the curator was set up and had called the veterinary group there at the Lincoln Park Zoo. Unfortunately, that chick did end up passing.
The chick that passed away didn't have any outward sign of being hurt or harmed. So there was a question mark as to what had happened to it. And of course, that raised concern about could it happen to the other chicks. So we basically doubled our effort about, watching them, monitoring them. We really, fortunately, never saw the same signs with the other two chicks.
get 2 out of the 3 is just absolutely amazing.
It's just been one of the most exciting things I've ever experienced, and also incredibly gratifying, because I know that the reason these birds came to this beach is because of the quality of the open beach and also the presence of the dunes, which is the type of habitat that they're comfortable in.
And literally hundreds and hundreds of people a day were going by this nest, and just that opportunity to share this very special event with so many people in Chicago is literally an outdoor classroom.
What made them special was that they're an incredible organism that we share this planet with. And we, going forward as a city, as a country, a state, people, whatever you name it, it's up to us to, give them that space, considering that they didn't have the space because of us.
This was a one in the win column in the age of Trump. This is one where the environment won. What's happened with Montrose is the culmination of a restoration effort that started in the mid-'60s. I guess Mr. Landy and Dr. Beecher, they spearheaded this thing. And native grasses, ridding an invasive species. I mean, they've really made a paradise. If these guys were alive to see that there were piping plovers nesting there, they'd be in tears.
People and volunteers who have been birders for 20, 30, 40 years, who have said this has been their most meaningful experience in their birding life. Certainly for me, it was a magical summer.
My dream is to have this spread over the whole Great Lakes area, and every small piece of beach that we can have some kind of stewardship program in place should any endangered birds, not just the plovers, choose to nest in these areas. There's so little habitat left for these birds, and we have to share that with them, and it's all about educating people how to do that.
Right, so I'm going to pause there and switch over to my slides. And let me just start this. Okay, so I should correct something, because in the end screen there, we say that plans were being made for 2020. Obviously 2020 has happened. So I'll get to that in a minute, but plans are also being made now for 2021. So I thought I'd kind of provide some more context and backstory for Monty and Rose. And if you didn't catch it, Monty and Rose are named after Montrose Beach. Monty and Rose, adding up to Montrose. But this is a shot. So the Great Lakes piping plover population, which it was mentioned briefly at the beginning, it's about 70 pairs in size. They're highly endangered. They're much larger populations out on the Atlantic coast and out in the Great Plains, kind of in the Dakotas and the prairie provinces of Canada. This is a shot of a young rose hatched in Muskegon at Muskegon State Park in 2017. And we know this because almost all of the Great Lakes plovers are banded by the Great Lakes Piping Plover Recovery Project. and so I've gotten to know the leaders of that project as well as a few other plover monitors around the Great Lakes. And that's how I was able to get this photo of Rose back in 2017. This is a shot of a chick that may be Monty. This is a shot featuring Sarah Saunders, who's with Audubon, National Audubon, I believe, and she banded the chicks that were at all the chicks from Monty's brood, which came from Silver Lake State Park near kind of south of Ludington, but north of Muskegon and on the western side of Michigan. And again, Monty was hatched in 2017. So before Monty and Rose came to Chicago in 2019, they had a rendezvous in Waukegan, Illinois, which is about an hour north of here, in 2018. So Monty and Rose decided to try to nest in a parking lot in Waukegan in 2018. And here's a shot of Monty in that gravel parking lot, which was at a municipal beach in Waukegan. Unfortunately, and so they did nest in Waukegan in 18, but their nest was in this awful location in the parking lot. And ultimately it was decided, because it was so dangerous, it was decided to take the eggs to an incubator, and the eggs were hatched off-site. And one of those eggs and young chicks did grow up to fledge. However, we don't know what has happened with that bird since it was released. So then, and so a little sidebar here, or kind of spinoff, is, and so stick with me here because I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is another plover that predated Monty and Rose at Montrose Beach in the winter, believe it or not, of 2018-19. And I really got into the story personally. There had been no piping plover that stayed into the month of January on record in Illinois prior to this one, Dodger. So, so Monty and Rose nest in Waukegan in 2018. Dodger shows up at Montrose Beach and for some reason lingers through the winter, perhaps a harbinger of things to come with Monty and Rose a few months later. And I just released a very short film called Dodger. It's 2 minutes long and it's available on my website for free if you want to check that out after this. So you saw the story. My film shows the summer of 2019. All of those events are the summer of 2019 from about June through August. Since then, this is a shot of Monty and Rose's 2020 nest out at a beach left empty. Montrose Beach was closed this summer because of the pandemic, and Monty and Rose had much more room to roam, but they returned to almost the exact same site, a little bit higher up in the beach, a little bit less prone to flooding, kind of up here in the grasses. And maybe smarter parents this go around than the first go around when they got flooded out. And even prior to that, the nest in the parking lot. And so they were very successful in 2020, having more room to roam on the beach. They actually had 3 chicks get to fledging, and this is a shot of them. This is a screen capture from the next version of this film that's going to come out later this year. So 3 chicks, they hatched. We later got reports from the wintering grounds. They were banded. The chicks were banded, which was really exciting because it meant we would know what would happen to these Chicago reared chicks, and they have been seen on the wintering grounds subsequently, 2 in Georgia and 1 in Florida this winter, which is really exciting. It was a different year, again, out at Montrose in 2020. It was very empty. We had very few opportunities to educate the public, unlike in 2019. There were far fewer human threats. We didn't have volleyball playing. We didn't have all the foot traffic on the beach. But it was good in that the plovers had more space to roam. Also, there are more predators out there. So that was sort of maybe a negative of the closed beach. One of the dramas from 2020 were these really aggressive killdeer. Killdeer can be a threat to piping plovers. They're bigger plovers. They can be very aggressive when they have their own nest, and there happened to be a killdeer nest very close to where Monty and Rose were in 2020, and there were some really fierce battles between the birds. And thankfully, the piping plovers held their own. And as I said, they were very successful. This is a shot of one of the young piping plovers from 2020. This is Esperanza. And so we had a naming contest to name the plovers that was pretty widely publicized. And we had very, very clever names that all had special meaning to people and communities in Chicago, which was exciting. This is a shot of Hazel down in Georgia from this fall. So Hazel is one of the 3 2020 chicks. And we're so fortunate to have such a wide group of plover fans across the country that are on the lookout for these birds all over the place. So what's next? So I'm working on a second film. The working title is The World of Monty and Rose. This is a hand-drawn map that's going to be featured in the film. We're going to go much farther into the Michigan story this go around, as well as providing an update to the 2020 story. So pretty excited about this, and I'm hoping it'll be done by middle of this year. And then here's a whole bunch of information about my various endeavors, and you can see we've got DVDs. I'll show one. I don't know if you can see me. Yeah, okay. DVDs are available on our website. We've got hats and merchandise. Monty and Rose have quite a loyal fan following, so check those out if you're interested in acquiring those. But also, you've got information here about where you can get my newsletter. That's also where the short film Dodger is available. And then you see all my social handles there as well. So I thank you for the time. I hope you enjoyed the film, and I'm glad to answer any questions that anybody may have, and whether about piping plovers generally or about this story in particular.
So do we want to open it up to people to just shout out, or do we wish to ask people to use the chat function?
Yeah, I think we have a small enough group that we could just shout out if people want to unmute.
Okay, well, I'm going to start then. So they go south for the summer. Do we have any idea if Monty and Rose spent the entire winter together?
Right. So piping plovers don't mate for life necessarily, and they don't stay together all year round. So Monty and Rose took off from here in late August and went their separate ways. And Rose, we've known for a couple of years, has been wintering down on the Gulf Coast of Florida on an offshore key near Tampa. And we just found out within the past 2 weeks, we had not known where Monty went for sure, but we finally have photographic evidence of Monty along the Gulf Coast of Texas at a place called Bolivar Flats. That's not far from Galveston, if you know that area. And so Monty It's not a big group of plovers that winter in Texas, but Monty is down there with them. But the bulk of the wintering piping plovers are over along Florida, Georgia to South Carolina, and then some also in the Bahamas too, and some down to Mexico. So, but they go their separate ways each year, and then they come back together.
For the last 2 years, they found each other in Chicago.
Yeah, so they came back together, and 2019 they kind of flew back and forth between Waukegan and Chicago initially, ultimately settling in Chicago. And in 2020, they arrived on the very same day, within hours of each other, on May 1st, back in Chicago, which is still kind of amazing to me that they could fly 1,000 miles each and arrive on the very same day back here. And even though the beach was closed, we had some park district officials who were out there keeping their eyes out.
Other questions?
What was the name of the key where Rose wintered?
It's called Anclote, Anclote Key, Anclote.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it must be accessible by kayak, because one of the people who photographed Rose, I know he's a kayaker, and there's a whole lot of shorebirds there, as well as snowy plovers and likely other species. And they get photographed and then reported back to the Plover Project folks, who then give us the identification.
Right.
The last piece of artwork that you showed, the illustration, I didn't hear. Was that for a book to come?
So that is for, I'll go back over to, so this is going to be in our next film. So I'm making a second longer version of this, trying to get it to 53 minutes. And so we had a cartographer hand draw this watercolor map, and we're going to use this in the film and help, and it'll be, we'll kind of show how the plovers move around Lake Michigan as part of their life cycle. And then we'll use some of this artwork for the stylization of the film, and also for the DVD package and things like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's very nice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It is.
Question. You talked about the population in the Great Lakes area. Do you know approximately what the world population is, or North America, whatever it is?
Yeah, it's I want to say it's a few thousand across the range, and I think both the eastern population along places like Cape Cod and Long Island and New Jersey, that's several hundred to 500 plus pairs. Like it gets into the thousands, I believe. The Great Plains population is actually even bigger than that. But historically, they were not a particularly large group of birds either. Like, and even on the Great Lakes, I don't think there were ever more than a few hundred pairs, from what I've heard people say. So it's never been like a highly prolific species. But the Great Lakes, I mean, the Great Lakes dipped all the way down to about 10 pairs in the mid 80s, and they were all confined to a pretty small portion of Michigan up near Sleeping Bear Dunes. And now they're at least on all 5 of the Great Lakes, with even a pair on Lake Erie now by Erie, Pennsylvania. So, and Lake Ontario has a couple of pairs too. So but there's still a long way to go. I'd like to see us maybe do what the Kirtland's warbler has done there and getting the numbers expanded. I'm gesturing toward Bill because I've read his book and I'm a fan of his work. And so you know, that I think I'd love to see us have like a plan to expand. And there is a plan. I don't want to make it sound like there's but like a really systematic effort to grow the population, I think would be a great next step personally.
The Detroit Zoo also has a program that they work with U of M. And in 2020, they hatched 11 plovers that from abandoned eggs.
That's amazing. Yeah, it was a rough year for plover nests, and there were a lot of rescues, and there were some limitations because of COVID and the number of people who could be out on the beaches and the number of people who could staff the recovery station up in Pellston. And so, but the Detroit Zoo, I think they took a lot of eggs straight to the zoo in Detroit this year, and I'm not sure that had ever happened before. So it's but Detroit Zoo, yeah, that's the hub of a lot of this. They're doing amazing work, and our local wildlife official there, who's in the film, Brad Semmel, he has driven eggs with a warmer, a brooder, it's called, over to the Detroit Zoo people, so they can take care of them and hatch them. It's pretty amazing. They've had, they hatch the birds and they'll go out in the wild and they'll reproduce as well, which is pretty outstanding. So it's a lot of individual, efforts to keep it going and expanding.
I got to unmute myself. Any other questions for Bob?
I just have a comment to make.
Juliet, good to see you.
Hi, I forgot and came on late, but it was fabulous. Washington Audubon's Facebook page has a post about, there was a Bird Studies Canada webinar that I posted up there about the piping plovers on the Canadian side, if anyone's interested in that. It was really fabulous. I enjoyed it. So if you scroll down maybe into September or October on our Facebook page, you should be able to find it. Washington Audubon.
Fantastic.
All right. Anybody else for questions or comments?
Well done, Bob. Really nice.
Bob, what's your next project?
Thanks so much.
You've got this one coming up, but anything on the horizon?
Well, you got some of my information here. I was going to be filming in the Bahamas, the wintering Kirtland's warbler this past spring. However, that didn't happen due to COVID. So that's still a goal that's out there. But in addition to this, I'm still thinking about what the next film project will be. And I have a newsletter called This Week in Birding that's occupying a lot of my time creating weekly posts. But I'm also thinking about other film projects and thinking about how to build off of this one. And this story still isn't over yet, so I imagine it's going to consume a certain amount of time as well. So, but yeah, Kirtland's warbler, it just is another one. It's interesting to me how many, I think there's a lot, I think of these as both kind of Midwest, endangered species. And so I think about the Kirtland's warbler a lot in the similar context. And if I could pull together a story from the Bahamian perspective, I think is one of my goals. But we'll see. And it could broaden out to include other warbler species. This very same place where Monty and Rose were hatched as a warbler hotspot, and just, the kind of place where you get 20 species in a day quite often in spring. So there might be, maybe there's a film in there somewhere too. We'll see.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate it. Our next meeting will be held on February 22nd. Of course, in January and February, we hold our meetings on the fourth Mondays of the month to avoid conflict with the federal holidays. Our speaker that night, we've got a change in plans, unfortunately, but it works out to our advantage. Our speaker that night will be our very own local Dorothy McClear, who will be here to talk about the latest developments in the knowledge of timber wolves in Michigan. So we'll be sending out a link about a week before the meeting. Bob, you're certainly welcome to join us. Come back and join us anytime. Thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. Those of you who joined us from Washtenaw County this evening or from wherever around the country, those of you, I hope you get sunburned down there. Not that I'm jealous or anything. And in the meantime, stay home, stay safe, mask up, and let's get those vaccines in us so that we can get out there this spring and go birding. Thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.